You cannot sleep tonight because you are not sure where you belong. Not in the geographic sense, not in the way of addresses and postal codes, but in the deeper sense, the one that pulls at you in the small hours when the world goes quiet and you are left alone with the question of whether you matter. Whether your presence here, in this particular arrangement of days and breaths and choices, registers anywhere beyond the glow of your phone screen and the algorithms that track your movements through digital space. You live in a world of infinite documentation. Every meal photographed, every thought compressed into characters and sent out into the void, every location tagged and mapped and stored on servers you will never see. You are the most recorded generation in human history, and yet you feel like a ghost. And you scroll through evidence of your own existence and feel nothing. The photographs accumulate. The data points multiply. But there is no book that holds you. No single place where your name is written in ink that will not fade, on paper that will yellow but endure, in a volume that sits on a shelf in a stone building that has witnessed 300 years of seasons and still stands. You think sometimes about permanence, about the difference between being recorded and being remembered, between data and memory, between the cloud and the earth. You have been told that nothing digital ever truly disappears, that everything you have ever posted or liked or searched for exists forever in some server farm in Oregon or Iceland, humming in climate-controlled darkness. This should comfort you. This should feel like immortality. And instead, it feels like drowning in your own scattered reflection, pieces of you floating in a million places, none of them whole, none of them home. The restlessness you feel is not new to the human experience, but it has a modern texture. Your ancestors knew the anxiety of mortality, the fear of being forgotten, but they had rituals for it. They had structures. They had a book. Not a book they wrote themselves, not a journal or a memoir, but a book that was written for them, about them, a book that contained every beginning and every end in their community, every marriage and birth and death, inscribed by hand in dark ink on parchment that was made to last. The Parish Register, the book of the living and the dead. And your name would have gone there had you been born in that time, in that place. Your christening recorded 6 days after your birth, your name written in a hand that was not your own, but belonged to someone whose job it was to remember you, to make you official, to place you in the continuing story. You would have been real in a way you do not feel real now. This is what pulls at you tonight. Not the fantasy of an easier life, because their lives were not easier. Not the romance of simplicity, because nothing about survival is simple. But the possibility of belonging so thoroughly to a place and a people that your existence was woven into a shared record, witnessed and acknowledged and held. You were born, and the book knew it. You married, and the book knew it. You died, and the book knew it. And the book sat in the church, which sat in the village, which sat in the landscape that had held your family for generations, and there you were. There you remained. You try to imagine what it would feel like to know that your life would be recorded, not by your own frantic efforts to prove you existed, but by the simple fact of your presence in a community that considered your existence worth noting. You would not have to perform your life for an audience of strangers. You would not have to curate your image or manage your brand, or wonder if you were posting enough, sharing enough, being enough. You would simply be born and someone would write it down. You would marry and someone would write it down. You would die and someone would write it down. And that would be enough. But tonight you are scrolling through your phone at 2 a.m, looking at the lives of people you barely know, say feeling the particular emptiness that comes from witnessing too much existence that has nothing to do with you. You see the weddings and the babies and the vacations and the accomplishments, all of it documented in real time, broadcast to hundreds or thousands of people who will glance at it for 3 seconds and move on. You add your like to the count. You move on. Nothing sticks. Nothing holds. You are not part of their story, and they are not part of yours. You are all just signaling your presence in the void, hoping someone will notice, knowing that even if they do, it will not be the kind of noticing that makes you feel less alone. The parish register would have made you feel less alone, not because it proved you were special or successful or admired, but because it proved you were here. You were part of the record. Your name was in the book with all the other names. The long list of ordinary people who were born and married and died in this particular place, generation after generation, until the pages were full and a new volume was started. The book did not care if you were remarkable. It cared that you existed. It cared that you belonged to this community, this moment, this unbroken chain of human presence. You do not have this anymore. You have followers, not community. You have metrics, not memory. You have the ability to broadcast your existence to the entire world and no assurance that anyone is truly receiving it. And so you cannot sleep. You lie in the darkness and feel the particular loneliness of being infinitely documented and utterly unwitnessed, recorded everywhere and held nowhere, known by the algorithm but recognized by no one. This is the ache. This is what keeps you awake. Not nostalgia for a time you never lived, but a longing for a kind of belonging that seems to have slipped out of the world. The sense that your life is part of a larger story, that your presence matters not because you have made yourself matter through achievement or performance, but because you are here, and being here is enough. The parish register knew this. The book knew this. Every name entered was an acknowledgement that this life, this particular arrangement of breath and bone and time, was worth recording, not for what it might achieve, but for what it was, a human being, born into a community, held by that community, remembered by that community. The register did not wait to see if you would do anything notable. It wrote you down the moment you arrived. You were official. You were real. You belonged. You wonder what it would do to your nervous system to live with that certainty. To know, from your first breath, that you were expected, that your arrival was not a disruption, but a continuation, that there was a place prepared for you in the story. The priest would open the book, he would dip his pen in ink, he would write the date and your name and your parents' names, and you would be entered into the record of the parish, which was the record of the world as far as anyone knew or needed to know. You would not have to earn this. You would not have to prove you deserved it. You were born, and that was enough. The book said so. And later, when you married, the book would say that too. Your name and your spouse's name, written in the same careful hand, or added to the long list of unions that had been recorded in this place. You would stand in the church where your parents had stood, where their parents had stood, and you would speak the same vows that had been spoken for centuries, and then you would sign the register or watch the priest sign it for you. And your marriage would be real, not just because you felt it or declared it, but because it was written in the book that held everyone's marriages, everyone's beginnings. This is what you have lost. Not the marriages themselves, which happen still, though less often and with less certainty than before, but the sense that your marriage is part of an ongoing story larger than yourself, that you are taking your place in a pattern that stretches back through time and will continue forward through your children and their children. The register held this knowledge. It showed you where you fit. It reminded you that you were not inventing your life from scratch, but stepping into a role that had been prepared for you, that was waiting for you. That made sense. And then, at the end, when you died, the book would receive you one last time. The priest would open to a new page, and he would write the date and your name, and sometimes the cause, and you would be entered into the record of the dead, which was kept in the same volume as the record of the living, because in that understanding of the world, the dead were not gone. They were still part of the community. They were still in the book. Their names were still read. Their presence was still acknowledged. They had not vanished into data or been reduced to a memorial page that no one visits. They were in the register, which sat in the church, which stood at the center of the village, and they remained. This is what you long for when you cannot sleep. Not death, not the past, not a simpler time, but the assurance that you will be held. That your existence is not something you have to constantly assert and defend and prove. That there is a place for you in the world, and that place is recorded, witnessed, remembered. That you are part of a story that is larger than your individual life, but includes your individual life. That you matter not because you have made yourself matter, but because you are here, and being here has always been enough. The modern world has given you many things: freedom, mobility, possibility, choice. You can be anyone, go anywhere, reinvent yourself as many times as you like. There is no book that defines you, no community that claims you, no record that holds you. You are liberated from all of that. You are free. And you are so tired of being free. You want to be held. You want to belong. You want to know that when you die, someone will write your name in a book that will outlast you, that will sit on a shelf with all the other books, that will be there for your great-great-grandchildren to find if they go looking for you. You want to know that you are part of something that continues, that your life is a thread in a fabric that is still being woven, that you are not just data points and digital footprints, but ink on paper, permanent, real, held. But you live now, in this time, in this arrangement of the world, and there is no parish register for you. There is no book. There is no single place where your beginning and your ending will be recorded in the same volume, held in the same building, tended by the same tradition. You have instead a million scattered records, fragments of yourself distributed across platforms and databases and devices, none of them connected, none of them whole, none of them permanent in the way that matters. And so you scroll, and so you post, and so you try to create the illusion of being witnessed, being remembered, being held. You document your life obsessively because there is no one else who will do it for you, no priest with a book, no community with a shared record. You are on your own. You are responsible for your own remembering. And it is exhausting. This exhaustion is what the parish register solved. Not by making life easier. Not by removing hardship or suffering or loss, but by distributing the burden of remembering. You did not have to prove you existed. The book did it for you. You did not have to fight to be remembered. The community did it for you. Your life was woven into the shared record from the moment you arrived, and you could rest in that knowledge. You could stop performing. You could stop justifying your presence. You could simply be, and the book would hold you. Let yourself feel this longing, not as something to be ashamed of or dismissed as naive romanticism, but as a real grief for a real loss. The parish register represented a way of being human that has largely disappeared from the world, and it is worth mourning. You have gained much in its absence. You have lost much too. Both things can be true. But the world is quieter now than when you started reading this. The restlessness has not disappeared, but it has softened. You are still here, still awake, still holding the question of where you belong. But maybe the question has shifted slightly. Maybe instead of asking how to make yourself matter in a world that seems to have no place for you, you can ask what it would mean to live as if you already matter, as if your presence here is already enough, as if there is a book somewhere, invisible but real, that holds your name. Perhaps you can be that book for yourself. But first, let us go back. Let us go to the place where the parish register was not a metaphor or a symbol, but an actual object. A book. Let us enter the world that created it and needed it and built its sense of meaning around it. Not because that world was better, but because understanding what they had might help you understand what you are missing. The village is smaller than you imagine. When you think of the past, you tend to populate it with crowds, with the teeming multitudes of history. But most people lived their entire lives knowing only a handful of other souls. 100 people, maybe 200 if the parish was large. Everyone within a day's walk. Everyone known. You would have recognized every face in the churchyard on Sunday morning. The old man who always sat in the back pew, the young mother with her infant, the farmer whose land bordered your family's land, the blacksmith, the miller, the weaver. You knew their names, and they knew yours. You knew who was sick, and who had just married, and who had lost a child last winter. You knew because there were so few of you, and because your lives were woven together by necessity and proximity, and the simple fact that there was nowhere else to go. The church stood at the center of this world. Literally, geographically, at the center of the village, but also at the center of time and meaning. The church was where you were christened and married and mourned. The church was where the year was marked, feast days and fast days, the rhythm of the liturgical calendar that shaped your sense of time more than any clock. The church was where the register was kept. You would have seen it, the register, if you paid attention during services. A large volume, leather-bound, sitting on a table near the altar or locked in a chest in the vestry. You would have known what it was for. Everyone knew. The book of beginnings and endings, said the official record. When a child was born, the priest would open the book and write the date, and the name, and the names of the parents. And that child was now part of the story. When two people married, the priest would open the book and write their names, and that marriage was now official, recognized not just by the couple, but by the church, and therefore by God, and therefore by reality itself. When someone died, the priest would open the book one final time and record the death, and that person was released from the register of the living, but entered into the register of the dead, which was the same book, the same continuity. This mattered in ways that are hard to recover from where you sit now. The register was not just a record, it was proof. Proof that you existed, proof that you belonged to this community. Is proof that your life had been witnessed and acknowledged. In a world before birth certificates and legal documents and government databases, the parish register was how you established who you were. If you needed to prove your age, you would consult the register. If you needed to prove your marriage, you would consult the register. If you needed to claim an inheritance or establish your legitimacy, you would consult the register. The book held you. The book knew you. The book was, in a sense, more real than you were. But it was more than just a legal document. The register was also a kind of collective memory. It held the story of the community. You could open it and trace back through the generations, seeing the same family names appear over and over, watching the pattern of births and deaths and marriages. Is understanding yourself as a part of a chain that stretched back into the past and would continue into the future. Your name in the book was not an isolated entry. It was connected to other names, to your parents and grandparents and cousins and neighbors, all of you written into the same story, all of you part of the same ongoing life. This gave you a sense of place that is almost impossible to imagine now. You knew where you came from. You could see it in the book. Your grandfather's name, his christening recorded 60 years ago, his marriage recorded 40 years ago, his death recorded 10 years ago. Your father's name, christened 30 years ago, married 8 years ago. Your name, christened last month. The pattern was clear. The continuity was visible. You were not adrift in history. You were anchored to this place, this community, this particular arrangement of soil and stone and tradition. And this anchoring was not just genealogical. It was also social, communal, spiritual. The register was kept by the church, which meant that your life was held not just by your family, but by the institution that held everyone, that claimed to speak for God, that connected you to something beyond your immediate circumstances. When the priest wrote your name in the book, he was not just recording a fact. He was performing a ritual of inclusion. He was saying, this child belongs to this community. This child is part of the body of Christ. This child is held. You can feel, even from this distance, the weight of that assurance. to be born into a world that expected you, that had a place prepared for you, that knew what to do with you. The priest did not ask your parents if they wanted their child registered. Of course they did. Of course you would be registered. Of course your name would go in the book. This was not optional. This was what it meant to be human in this place. You were born, and you were entered into the record, and you belonged. The christening would happen quickly, usually within a few days of birth, because infant mortality was high, and the church taught that an unbaptized child could not enter heaven. This was not a gentle doctrine. This was not a comfort, but it meant that your parents would rush you to the church, would gather godparents and witnesses, would watch as the priest poured water over your head and spoke the ancient words, and then turned to the register and wrote your name. You were christened, you were saved, you were official, and the book said so. And from that moment, you were part of the story. You would grow up hearing your name in the register read aloud during services when the new births were announced. You would stand in the church and know that you were written there, in that book, in that permanent record. You would understand yourself as part of a community that knew you, that claimed you, that would remember you. This is what you do not have. Not because you were not christened, perhaps you were, but because the record of your christening, if it exists, is not held in the same place as the record of your eventual death. It is not part of a continuous story kept in one volume, in one building, in one community. Your life is scattered across databases and documents and jurisdictions. Your birth certificate is in one place, your marriage license in another. Your death certificate will be in another still. There is no single book that holds you from beginning to end. There is no community that will keep that book for generations. There is no church at the center of your world that anchors your existence. You have freedom instead. You can move anywhere, be anyone, start over as many times as you like. No book defines you. No community claims you. You are liberated. And you are so lonely. The rhythm of life in that world was shaped by the register in ways both obvious and subtle. You would hear about deaths before you saw them recorded. Someone's grandmother had died in the night, and the news would spread through the village by morning. But the death was not official until it was in the book. The body would be prepared, and the grave would be dug, and the funeral would be held. But at some point, the priest would open the register and write the name and the date, and perhaps the cause, and then it was real. Then it was over. Then the person had moved from the register of the living to the register of the dead. This created a strange double awareness. The dead were gone, their bodies in the ground. But they were also still present, still in the book, still part of the community's story. You could open the register and see your grandmother's name, her christening 70 years ago, her marriage 50 years ago, her death last week. She was still there. The book still held her. And you would see her name alongside all the others who had died that year. The harsh winter that took 6 children. The fever that claimed the young mother. The old man who simply went to sleep and did not wake. All of them in the register. Their deaths recorded in the same careful hand, entered into the same permanent record. They were not erased. They were not forgotten. They were held by the book, which was held by the church, which was held by the community that continued. This is why mortality felt different then. Not less painful. Death was no easier to bear because it was recorded in a book, but less isolating. Your grief was not a private experience that you had to process alone or share only with immediate family. Your grief was part of the community's grief. The register showed you that death was woven into the pattern of life, that everyone in the book would eventually move from one column to another, from christening to burial, and that this was not an aberration, but the design. You were born to die. The book knew this. The book held both. And there was something almost comforting in that certainty. Not the certainty of death itself, which was terrible and ever-present, but the certainty that death would be witnessed and recorded and remembered. You would not simply vanish. You would not be forgotten. Your name would remain in the book, in the church, in the story of the community. Your children and grandchildren could point to your entry and say, "There, that is when she lived, that is when she died, she was here." This is different from the way you think about digital memory, which promises to preserve everything forever, but actually preserves nothing in a way that feels real. Your social media profiles might outlast you, ghostly presences maintained by algorithms, but they will not be visited with the care and intention of someone opening an old register to trace their family line. The register was physical, local, specific. It lived in a particular place and could only be accessed by going to that place. This limitation was actually its strength. It meant that to remember someone, you had to return to the community, to the church, to the shared space. You had to be in relationship with the place that held the memory. Digital memory is everywhere and nowhere. It is accessible from anywhere with an internet connection, which means it belongs to no particular place, which means it does not root you anywhere. You can look up your family history online now, trace your genealogy through databases and digitized records, and learn facts about ancestors you never knew. But you do not have to go home to do it. You do not have to return to the village, the church, the graveyard where they are buried. The information is abstracted from place, which makes it easier to access, but also less meaningful. It does not anchor you. It does not give you a home. The parish register gave you a home, not just a house or a location, but a home in the deeper sense, a place where you belonged, where you were known, where your story was woven into the larger story. You were not just an individual with a personal history. You were part of a collective history, recorded in a shared book, held by a shared institution, remembered by a shared community. And this belonging was not something you had to achieve or earn. It was given to you at birth. The priest wrote your name in the book, and you belonged. Thus, you did not have to prove yourself worthy of inclusion. You did not have to build a following or cultivate a personal brand or demonstrate your value. You simply had to exist. And existence was enough. This is what you miss when you scroll through your phone at 2 in the morning, looking at carefully curated lives that make you feel inadequate. You miss the sense that your existence is inherently valuable, not because of what you achieve or how you appear, but because you are here. Because you are alive. Because you are part of the human community, which has always included people who are remarkable and people who are ordinary, people who are successful and people who struggle, people who are remembered for their deeds, and people who are remembered simply because they were here, and their names were written in the book. The register did not distinguish. It did not rank. It did not judge. It simply recorded. You were born, and it noted the fact. You married, and it noted the fact. You died, and it noted the fact. What you did in between was your own story, but the fact of your existence was the community's story. And that was what the book preserved. This is not to say that life was fair, or that everyone mattered equally in the social hierarchy of that world. The poor were still poor, and the rich were still rich, and the powerful still held power. But in the register at least, everyone was recorded with the same basic care. The Lord's son and the beggar's daughter both had their christenings entered in the same hand, in the same book, with the same ritual. Both belonged to the parish. Both were part of the story. The book held them both. And this is worth sitting with. The idea that there might be a way of organizing human life that acknowledges everyone's existence as inherently valuable, that creates a shared record of who we are, that distributes the burden of remembering so that no one has to fight to be seen. The parish register was not perfect. It was maintained by an institution that perpetuated many injustices. It existed in a social order that we would not want to return to. But the principle underneath it, the idea that every life deserves to be witnessed and recorded and held, that is worth recovering. You live in a world that claims to value every individual, that speaks constantly about human rights and dignity and equality. But you do not have a shared record. You do not have a book that holds everyone. You have instead a fragmented system where some people are endlessly documented and others disappear without a trace, where visibility is something you have to fight for, where being remembered is a privilege rather than a given. The parish register was not a privilege, it was a right. Not a legal right, the concept barely existed, but a right that came from your membership in the community. You were born here, so your name went in the book. It was that simple. It was that profound. Imagine the moment when the priest first opened the register after your birth. Your parents would have brought you to the church, carrying you through the same doors they had passed through their entire lives. The church that had stood in the village for centuries, its stones laid by people whose names were in the earlier volumes of the register, its walls holding the memory of everyone who had ever prayed there. You would be carried to the font, and water would be poured over your head, and words would be spoken, and then, in the vestry, or at a table near the altar, the priest would take out the register. The book would be heavy, leather-bound, the pages thick parchment made from animal skin, meant to last. The priest would open to the current page, to the section marked for christenings, and he would find the next blank line. He would dip his pen in ink, real ink made from oak galls and iron sulfate, ink that would not fade for hundreds of years. And he would write, the date first, the day and month and year of your christening, which might be days or weeks after your birth, depending on how quickly your parents could arrange it. Then your name. The name your parents had chosen for you, spoken aloud for the first time in the church, made official by its inscription in the book. Then your parents' names, your father's name and occupation, your mother's name, establishing who you belonged to, where you came from, what family line you continued. And then, if you were fortunate, the names of your godparents, the people who had agreed to take responsibility for your spiritual upbringing, who would stand with you in the church and make promises on your behalf. Their names would be written in the register too, linking them to you permanently, creating a relationship that was not just social, but official, recorded, witnessed. The priest would finish writing and would sprinkle sand over the wet ink to dry it. He would close the book. And you would be official. You would be part of the record. You would belong. Your parents would know this. They would feel it, the relief and the rightness of it. Their child was christened. Their child was in the book. Their child was safe, or as safe as anyone could be, in a world where death came often and early. But at least if you died tomorrow, you would be remembered. You would be in the register. Your brief life would not be erased. You would have existed, and the book would prove it. This assurance shaped the way they loved you. Not that they loved you more because you were registered, love does not work that way, but that they loved you with a certain confidence that you belonged to something larger than their individual family. You belonged to the parish. You belonged to the church. You belonged to God. The register was evidence of these nested belongings, each one holding you more securely than the last. And as you grew, you would internalize this. You would understand yourself as someone who was expected, who was part of a pattern, who had a place. You would see your name in the register if you ever had occasion to look, and you would see it among all the other names, and you would understand that you were part of a story that was larger than yourself but included yourself. You were not the main character. No one was. The main character was the community, the ongoing life of the parish, and you were a thread in that fabric. This is a fundamentally different way of constructing identity than what you have now. Now, you are taught to think of yourself as the protagonist of your own story, the hero of your own journey, and the center of your own universe. You are encouraged to discover yourself, to create yourself, to become whoever you want to be. There are no scripts. There are no predetermined roles. You are free to invent your life from scratch. And this freedom is both exhilarating and terrifying. Because if you can be anyone, then you are also no one until you make yourself someone. If there is no book that defines you, then you have to define yourself, constantly, through your choices and achievements and performances. You have to prove that you exist. You have to earn your place in the world. And you can never stop, because there is no final record, no permanent book, no moment when you can rest and know that you are held. The Parish Register offered that rest, not because it made your life easier or less demanding, but because it removed the existential burden of having to prove you existed. The book did that for you. You could focus your energy on living, on working, and loving and surviving, without the constant background anxiety of wondering if anyone would remember you, if you mattered, if you were real. You were real. The book said so, and that was enough. When you married, the register would receive you again. This was perhaps the most significant entry, more public than your christening, more ceremonial. The wedding would be announced in advance. The banns read aloud in church for 3 consecutive Sundays, giving the community notice that you and your intended planned to marry, giving anyone with objections the chance to voice them. This public declaration was required. Your marriage was not just a private agreement between 2 people, or it was a social event that concerned the entire community. And then the day would come. You would stand in the church with your family and neighbours watching. You would speak the vows that everyone spoke, the same words that had joined couples for generations. And then, after the ceremony, you would go to the register. You and your spouse would watch as the priest opened the book to the marriage section and wrote your names. Both names, linked together, entered into the permanent record. Sometimes you would sign the register yourself. More often, especially if you could not write, you would simply watch as the priest did it for you. But either way, the entry was made. Your marriage was official. It was in the book. It was witnessed not just by the people present, but by the institution that would outlast all of you. The church would still be standing in 100 years, and the register would still be on the shelf, and someone could open it and see your names and know that on this day, in this place, you and your spouse were joined. This permanence shaped the way marriage was understood. It was not something you could easily undo. Once your names were in the book, they stayed there. There was no erasing them, no crossing them out if things did not work out. The marriage might end through death or abandonment, but the record remained. You had been married. The book proved it. And that proof carried legal and social weight that our modern marriage certificates carry, but in a way that felt more absolute, more final, more real. Because the book was kept in the church, which was the center of the community, and which was the center of the world as you knew it. The register was not filed away in some government office you would never visit. It was right there, in the building where you worshipped every Sunday, where you had been christened, where you would eventually be mourned. Your marriage was woven into the same fabric as everything else in your life. It was part of the continuous story. And this continuity meant something. It meant that your marriage was not just a romantic choice or a personal decision. It was part of the community's life. Your marriage created new connections between families, new economic arrangements, new possibilities for children who would carry both family lines forward. Your marriage would eventually produce entries of its own, christenings of your children. And those children would grow and marry and produce their own entries, and the pattern would continue. All of it recorded in the register, all of it part of the ongoing story. You can feel the weight of this if you let yourself. The sense that your choices have consequences that extend beyond your individual life, that you are part of a chain that reaches both backward and forward in time, that what you do matters not just to you, but to the community that will remember you. This is not the same as pressure to conform or to meet expectations, though there was plenty of that in that world. This is something different. This is the knowledge that you are connected, that your life is woven together with other lives, that you are not alone even in your most private moments, because those moments will eventually become part of the shared record. When you married, the community knew. When you had children, the community knew. When you died, the community knew. Not because they were surveilling you or invading your privacy, but because these were the moments that mattered, the transitions that shaped the community's life as much as your own. And the register held them all, creating a map of connection and relationship that anyone could read if they took the time to look. This is what you do not have when you post your engagement photos on social media. You have visibility, you have likes and comments and congratulations from people you barely know, but you do not have the sense that your marriage is being woven into a larger story. You do not have the assurance that 100 years from now, and someone could trace your family line and see your name linked with your spouse's name in a book that has held marriages for centuries. You have data, but you do not have memory. You have documentation, but you do not have belonging. The register gave you belonging. It said, "This marriage is part of our story. This couple is part of our community. We witness this. We record this. We hold this." And that collective witnessing created a kind of meaning that individual choice cannot create on its own. Your marriage mattered not just because you chose it, but because the community acknowledged it, because the church blessed it, because the book recorded it. You were not just two people in love. You were part of the ongoing life of the parish, and your love was a thread in that larger fabric. And then, eventually, inevitably, you would die. And the register would receive you one last time. The funeral would be held in the same church where you were christened and married. Your body would be carried through the same doors you had passed through your entire life. The same people who had witnessed your christening and your wedding would now witness your burial. And after your body was lowered into the ground in the churchyard, after the prayers were said and the mourners dispersed, the priest would return to the vestry and open the register. He would turn to the section marked for burials. He would find the next blank line. He would write the date of your death, your name, sometimes your age, or the cause of death, sometimes the location of your grave, and then you would be complete. Your story in the register would have its ending. You had been born, and it was recorded. And you had married, and it was recorded. You had died, and it was recorded. The book held you from beginning to end. This ending was not erasure. You were not being removed from the story. You were being moved from one part of the story to another. The register did not distinguish between the living and the dead in its fundamental structure. Both were part of the parish. Both were part of the community. Both were held by the book. And this created a relationship with death that is hard for us to understand now. Death was ever present in that world. Infant mortality was staggering. Disease and accident and hardship claimed people of all ages. Death was not hidden away in hospitals and nursing homes. It happened at home, in full view of the family and often the community. Bodies were laid out in the house where the person had lived. Children saw death regularly, understood it as part of life, learned to grieve and move on because there was no other choice. But death was also held by the register. Your death was not a private tragedy that your family had to process alone. It was a communal loss, recorded in the shared book, witnessed by the shared institution. The priest would write your name with the same care he had used to write your christening, the same permanence, the same official acknowledgement. You had lived. You had died. Both facts mattered. Both facts were recorded, and your family could return to the register years later and find your entry. They could see the date of your death, could remember, could trace the line of your life from christening to marriage to burial. They could see you in the context of all the others who had died that year. You could understand their grief as part of the community's ongoing experience of loss. They were not alone in their mourning. The register showed them that death was woven into the pattern of life, that everyone who was born would eventually die, that this was not an aberration, but the design. This did not make death easier, but it made death less isolating. Your grief was held by the community, recorded in the book, acknowledged by the institution that would continue after you were gone. You were not expected to process your loss in private, or to get over it quickly, or to perform happiness for others. You were allowed to grieve, and your grief was part of the story. And more than that, the dead were not forgotten. They remained in the register, which remained in the church, which remained in the village. Their names could be read. Their dates could be remembered. Anniversaries could be observed. The dead were still part of the community, still held by the book, still woven into the fabric of the parish. This is so different from the way you experience death now. Now, death is sanitized, professionalized, removed from everyday life. You do not see bodies. You do not participate in preparing them for burial. You do not have a shared book that records every death in your community. Instead, you have obituaries that run in newspapers no one reads, online memorial pages that sit unchanged for years, digital presences that haunt the internet like ghosts. And when someone you love dies, you are often alone with your grief. You are expected to process it privately, to move on quickly, to not burden others with your sorrow. There is no shared book that holds your loss, no community that records it, no institution that says, "This death matters, this person mattered, we witnessed this, we remember." The parish register said all of those things. It said, "This person was born here, this person lived here, this person died here," and we remember. And that remembering was not dependent on the person being remarkable or successful or well-loved. It was dependent only on the fact that they existed, that they were part of the community, that they belonged. You belonged. The book said so. And even in death, you continued to belong. You were still in the register. You were still part of the story. You had not vanished. You had not been erased. You were held. There is something you need to understand about why this matters so much now. Why the image of the parish register pulls at you with such force. Weiss, it is not because you want to go back to that world. You do not. That world was harsh and limited and unjust in ways that would be intolerable to you. But that world had something you desperately need. It had a way of holding people that did not depend on their individual effort or achievement. It had structures of belonging that were given, not earned. You live in a world that tells you that you can be anything, but it does not give you a sense that you are already something simply by existing. You have to make yourself into something. You have to build a life, build a career, build a personal brand, build a following. You have to document your own existence because no one else will do it for you. You have to fight to be seen, to be remembered, to matter. And this is exhausting. This is why you cannot sleep. Because you are carrying a burden that your ancestors did not carry. They had to struggle to survive, and that struggle was immense and unrelenting. But they did not have to struggle to exist. Their existence was acknowledged from birth. They were in the book. They belonged. You do not have a book. You have the burden of creating your own significance in a world that offers infinite possibilities, but no assurance that any of them will make you feel less alone. You can be anyone, which means you are no one until you make yourself someone. And the making is endless. The parish register solved this problem. Not perfectly, not without its own oppressions and limitations, but it solved it. It said, "You exist. We see you. We record you. You belong." And that was enough. You did not have to do anything else to justify your place in the world. You were born here, so you belonged here. The book proved it. This is what you long for when you scroll through social media and feel empty. You long for that assurance. You long to belong somewhere so completely that you do not have to constantly perform your existence. You long for a book that holds you, a community that knows you, a place where you can rest. But you cannot go back. The world that created the parish register is gone, and many of the things that disappeared with it needed to disappear. The rigid social hierarchies, the limited possibilities, the crushing conformity, the violence done to anyone who did not fit the narrow definitions of acceptable existence. You would not survive in that world. You would not want to, but you can learn from it. you can understand that the longing you feel is not naive or sentimental, but a recognition of something real that has been lost. The parish register represented a way of organising human community that acknowledged every person's existence as inherently valuable. It created a shared record that distributed the burden of remembering. It gave people a sense of place and continuity and belonging that did not depend on their individual efforts. These are things you still need. These are things every human needs. The question is not how to recreate the parish register, but how to create new structures of belonging that serve the same function in a world that looks nothing like the one that created the original. This is not a question you have to answer tonight. So tonight, you just need to understand what you are longing for and why that longing is legitimate. You are not being foolish or nostalgic. You are recognizing a real human need that has been left unmet by the modern world. The need to belong somewhere. The need to be held by something larger than yourself. The need to know that your existence is witnessed and recorded and remembered not because you have earned it, but because you are here. You are here. And that is enough. It has always been enough. The parish register knew this. And somewhere, deeper than your conscious mind, you know it too. Let us stay a bit longer in that world. Not to romanticize it, but to understand what the rhythm of life felt like when your existence was woven into a shared record from birth to death. There is something important here about time, about memory, about the way human beings construct meaning. When you were christened, you entered linear time in a particular way. The date was written in the register, and from that moment forward, your life was measured against the Christian calendar that shaped the year. The feast days and fast days, the seasons of Advent and Lent and Easter and Pentecost, the cycle of saints' days that gave each day its name and character. Your birthday might be remembered, or it might not, but your christening day was recorded. That was the day that counted. That was the day you entered the story. And the calendar that shaped your year was the same calendar that had shaped your parents' year and your grandparents' year, and would shape your children's year. The same holy days, the same rhythms, the same story told over and over. This created a sense of time as circular, repeating, reliable. The world changed, people died, and were born and died again, but the calendar remained. Christmas would come again. Easter would come again. The harvest would come again. You could count on this, and woven through this circular time was the linear time of the register. You were born on this date. You were christened on this date. You will marry on a future date. You will die on a future date. Your life was a line moving forward through the repeating circles of the calendar, and both patterns mattered. Both gave your life shape and meaning. This is very different from the way you experience time now. You have linear time, yes, measured in years and birthdays and anniversaries. But you do not have the circular time of a shared calendar that gives each day its meaning. You have holidays, but they are increasingly secular, increasingly commercial, increasingly disconnected from any larger story. You have your birthday, but it is just a day, a marker of your individual progress through time, not a connection to any pattern larger than yourself. And you do not have the register that marks the significant transitions. You have documents, certificates, licenses, but they are scattered across different systems and offices and databases. There is no single book that holds your whole life, no single institution that witnesses all your beginnings and endings. You are fragmented across time and space. Pieces of you recorded in different places, none of them connected, none of them telling the complete story. The register told the complete story. At least, it told the story that mattered to the community. It did not record every detail of your life, all your daily struggles and joys and choices. But it recorded the transitions, the moments when you moved from one state to another, from unbaptized to baptized, from unmarried to married, from living to dead. These were the moments that changed not just your status, but the community's understanding of who you were and where you fit. And because these moments were recorded in a shared book, they became part of the community's memory. The older members of the parish could remember when you were christened, could remember your wedding, could anticipate your death. They held your story in their minds, but they also trusted the book to hold it more permanently. The book would outlast their memories. The book would be there for the next generation and the next, one telling the story of everyone who had passed through this place. This created a relationship between individual memory and collective memory that is worth considering. Your memory is finite, flawed, selective. You forget things, you misremember things, you die, and your memories die with you. But the register remembered. The register did not forget. The register would be there long after you were gone, holding the facts of your existence, available to anyone who wanted to know. And this was not surveillance. This was not the state keeping tabs on you for purposes of control. This was the community keeping a record for purposes of memory, of continuity, of knowing who belonged. The register was not secret. It was kept in the church, which was the most public building in the village. Anyone could ask to see it. And anyone could trace their family line through it. Anyone could verify a date or a relationship or a fact. The register was a shared resource, a common memory, a tool for maintaining the bonds that held the community together. You do not have this kind of shared record now. You have genealogy websites where you can search digitized records, but these are commercial enterprises, not communal institutions. You have social media where you can post your own memories, but these are individual performances, not shared records. You have government databases that track you for administrative purposes, but these are not accessible to you in the way the parish register was accessible. You are tracked, yes, constantly and thoroughly, but you are not held. You are not remembered in a way that creates belonging. The register created belonging. It said, "But these are the people who have lived in this place. These are their names. These are their connections to each other. This is our story." And by being in the register, you were part of that story. You belonged to the hour. You were not an isolated individual. You were a member of the community, and the book proved it. There were rituals around the register that reinforced this sense of belonging. When a child was christened, the entry in the register was made with ceremony. The priest would announce that he was recording the christening. Sometimes the family would be invited to witness the entry being made. The act of writing the name in the book was itself a ritual, a performance of inclusion, a way of saying, "This child is now part of us." And when couples married, the signing of the register was the climax of the ceremony. The vows had been spoken, the blessing given, but the marriage was not complete until the names were in the book. Sometimes the couple would sign together, their signatures next to each other, a visual representation of their union. Sometimes witnesses would sign as well, adding their names to the entry, creating a web of connection and responsibility. The register was not just a record. It was a participant in the ritual, a necessary element of the transformation from two individuals into one married couple. Even death had its rituals around the register. The priest would record the burial, sometimes with details about the deceased's life, their occupation, their relationships, their place in the community. These details were not required, but they were often included, especially for people who had been significant in the parish's life. The register became a kind of brief biography, a way of remembering not just the fact of death, but something about the person who had died. And families would return to these entries later, reading them as a way of remembering their loved ones. The register was not locked away or inaccessible. It was kept in the church, and the church was always open, or at least always accessible. You could ask to see the register. You could trace your family's entries. You could sit with the book and remember. This physical relationship with the record is important. The register was an object. It had weight and texture. The pages were parchment. The ink was permanent. The binding was leather. You could touch it. You could see the handwriting, which might change over the years as different priests took responsibility for the parish, but which always had the same purpose: recording lives, holding stories, creating memory. This physicality made the record feel real in a way that digital records do not. You can look up your birth certificate online now, download a PDF, print it out. But it does not feel real. It does not feel permanent. It is just data, infinitely reproducible, stored on servers you cannot see, maintained by systems you do not understand. The parish register was different. It was singular. There was only one copy, one original, one book. If it burned or was lost or destroyed, the record would be gone. This fragility made it precious. This uniqueness made it important. And the community understood this. The register was one of the most valuable objects in the parish, not for its monetary worth, but for what it contained. The history of the community and the names of everyone who had belonged, the record that could not be replaced. The church would go to great lengths to protect the register, to keep it safe from fire and flood and theft. Because losing the register would be losing the community's memory of itself. You do not have objects like this in your life. You have things, many things, but you do not have objects that hold your entire community's memory. You do not have something that everyone in your community values equally because it contains all of your stories. You have instead fragmented, individualized, digital records that belong to no one and everyone, that are stored in the cloud and accessible from anywhere, which means they are connected to nowhere. The parish register was connected to somewhere. It sat in the church, which sat in the village, and which sat in the landscape that your family had known for generations. The register could only be accessed by going to that place, by entering that building, by asking to see it. This friction was not a bug, but a feature. It meant that engaging with the record required you to be in relationship with the place and the community. You could not access your family history without returning home, without standing in the church where your ancestors had stood, without touching the book they had touched. This created a kind of pilgrimage. People who had moved away, who had left the village for work or marriage or opportunity, would return to see the register. They would trace their family's entries, would remember, would feel the connection to the place they had come from. The register pulled them home, not through obligation, but through the desire to be held by that memory, to be reminded of where they came from, to see their name in the book that contained everyone who had ever belonged. You do not have this pull. You can access your family history from anywhere, which means you are not pulled anywhere. You can be anywhere, which means you are nowhere. You are untethered, which you were told would be freedom, and it is. But it is also a kind of weightlessness that makes you feel like you might float away entirely. The register also shaped the way the community understood itself across time. When you opened the book and looked at the entries from 50 or 100 years ago, you saw names you recognized. Not because you knew those people, they were long dead, but because their names had continued. The family names repeated generation after generation. The same surnames appeared in christening after christening, marriage after marriage, burial after burial. You could trace a family line through the register, watching it branch and grow, and sometimes end, seeing the pattern of human continuity. This gave you a sense of deep time that is hard to recover now. You understood yourself as part of a chain that stretched back into the past and forward into the future. Your life was not isolated or unprecedented. You were doing what your ancestors had done, being born, marrying, having children, dying. And your children would do the same, and their children. The register showed you this pattern, made it visible, made it real. And this pattern was comforting in a way that is difficult to explain to someone who has not experienced it. You were not alone in your mortality. You were not the first person to be born or to die. You were part of a process that had been happening for as long as anyone could remember and would continue long after you were gone. The register held the evidence. Page after page of names, dates, lives lived and ended, all of it recorded in the same careful hand. all of it part of the same ongoing story. This did not make your individual life less valuable, but it did contextualize it. You were important, but you were not the most important. You were part of something larger, and that largeness held you in a way that individual significance cannot. You mattered because you belonged, not because you stood out. You were held by the pattern, not by your deviation from it. This is the opposite of what you are taught now. Now you are told to make your mark, to stand out, to be unique and special and different. You are told that your individual story is what matters, that you should write your own narrative, create your own path, be your own person. And there is value in this, there is freedom in this, but there is also a terrible loneliness. Because if your value comes from being unique, then you are in competition with everyone else who is trying to be unique. If your significance comes from standing out, then you are constantly comparing yourself to others, constantly feeling inadequate, constantly striving to be more interesting, more successful, more visible. And you can never rest. You can never simply be. You always have to be becoming, achieving, performing. The register offered a different model. You did not have to be unique to be recorded. You just had to exist. You did not have to achieve anything remarkable to have your name in the book. You just had to be born, to marry, to die. These ordinary transitions were enough. The book held you not because you were special, but because you were part of the community. And that was sufficient. This is what you long for when you feel the weight of having to constantly prove yourself. You long to be held without having to earn it. You long to belong without having to perform. You long for a book that records you simply because you are here. And the truth is, you deserve that. Every human deserves that. To be seen, to be witnessed, to be remembered, not for what they achieve, but for the simple fact of their existence. The Parish Register understood this. The modern world has forgotten it. But there were also ways in which the Register failed people, and this is important to acknowledge. The book held everyone who belonged to the parish, but belonging was defined narrowly. If you were not Christian, you were not in the book. If you did not conform to the Church's understanding of acceptable life, your entries might be marked with judgment or excluded entirely. If you were born outside of marriage, the Register might note this in language that shamed you. If you were poor or marginal or different, the book might record you, but it might not hold you with the same care as those who fit more easily into the community's expectations. The Register was maintained by the Church, which means it reflected the Church's biases and values. It was not neutral. It was not objective. It was a tool of an institution that had its own agendas, its own hierarchies, its own ideas about who mattered and how. And while the Register recorded everyone in the parish, it did not record everyone with equal dignity. This is the shadow side of the belonging that the Register created. It was conditional. It was limited. It was embedded in a social order that was often cruel and unjust. The book held you, yes, but it held you within a framework of expectations and judgments that might not have served you, that might have harmed you, that might have denied your full humanity. So when you long for the Parish Register, you need to be clear about what you are longing for. Not the institution that maintained it, not the social order that surrounded it, not the exclusions and judgments it sometimes perpetuated, but the principle underneath it. The idea that every human life deserves to be witnessed and recorded and held. The idea that belonging should be given, not earned. The idea that a community can maintain a shared memory of everyone who has passed through it. These principles can be separated from the historical register. They can be reimagined for a different world, a more just world, a world that holds everyone with equal care. But first, you have to understand what has been lost and why it mattered. You have to sit with the longing and understand that it is not foolish or naive, but a recognition of a real human need. The need to belong. The need to be held. The need to know that your existence is recorded somewhere, witnessed by someone, remembered by a community that will outlast you. This need is ancient. It is fundamental. And the modern world has not found a way to meet it. The parish register met it imperfectly within the constraints of its time and place. But it met it, and that is why the image of it pulls at you so strongly. Not because you want to return to that world, but because you want to live in a world that takes that need seriously, that creates structures to meet it, that does not leave you alone to document your own existence and hope that someone, somewhere, is paying attention. As the night deepens and your eyes grow heavy, let the image of the register soften into something less concrete. Not a historical object, but a symbol, a reminder, a question. What would it mean to live as if you were held? What would it mean to trust that your existence is witnessed and recorded and valued? Not because you have proven yourself worthy, but because you are here. The parish register cannot be recreated. The world that needed it and created it is gone, but the human need it served remains. You still need to belong. You still need to be held. You still need to know that your life is part of a larger story. And perhaps the work, your work, the work of your generation, is to find new ways to meet that need. New structures of belonging that do not depend on exclusion or conformity. New forms of collective memory that hold everyone with equal care. New ways of witnessing and recording and remembering that honor the dignity of every human life. This is not a small task. This is not something you can solve tonight. But tonight you can rest in the understanding that the longing you feel is legitimate. That it points to something real and important. That you are not foolish for wanting to be held. You are not foolish. You are human. And humans have always needed to belong to something larger than themselves. The parish register was one way of creating that belonging. There will be others. There must be others. But for now, let yourself rest in the image. The book on the shelf in the stone church. The pages filled with names. The ink that does not fade. The record that holds everyone from beginning to end. Imagine your name there, written in careful script, entered into the story, held. You are held. Not by a book, perhaps, not by a church or a community that no longer exists, but by something. By the simple fact that you are here, that you are alive, that you are part of the ongoing story of human existence. Your life matters. Your presence registers. You belong. The book knows this, and somewhere, deeper than your conscious mind, you know this too. Let the register become a metaphor now, a way of thinking about what it means to be human, to be mortal, to be part of a chain of existence that stretches back into the past and forward into the future. You are not just an individual floating through time and space. You are part of a pattern. You are connected to everyone who came before you and everyone who will come after you. You are held by that pattern, even when you cannot see it, even when you feel most alone. The parish register made the pattern visible. It showed you the connections. It traced the lines of relationship and continuity that bound the community together across generations. You could open the book and see your parents' names, your grandparents' names, the names of cousins and neighbors and strangers who shared your surname and therefore shared your history. You could understand yourself as part of a web of connection that was larger than any individual life. This understanding is available to you even without the register. You are connected. You are part of the pattern. You are held by the chain of existence that has been unbroken since the beginning of human life and will continue as long as humans continue. Your presence here, in this particular moment, is not random or meaningless. It is part of the ongoing story, and the story includes suffering and loss, and death, yes, but it also includes birth and connection and love. The register recorded all of it. The children who died in infancy and the children who grew to old age. not the marriages that lasted and the marriages that ended, the lives that were long and full, and the lives that were brief and hard. All of it was part of the story. All of it mattered. All of it was held by the book. You can hold your own life this way. You can witness your own existence with the same care that the priest brought to the register. You can record your days, not frantically, not performatively, but with the simple acknowledgement that you are here, that today happened, that your life is unfolding in this particular way. You can create your own book, your own record, your own way of saying, I was here, this happened, this mattered. But you do not have to do this alone. This is important. The register worked because it was a communal effort. The priest kept the record, but the record was for everyone. It held everyone. It belonged to the community, not to any individual. You need community. You need people who will witness your life, who will remember you, who will hold your story when you are gone. You need to be part of something larger than yourself. The modern world makes this difficult. The structures that once created community have largely dissolved. But the need remains. And where there is need, there is possibility. Perhaps you can create new forms of communal memory. Perhaps you can find or build communities that witness and record and remember each other. Perhaps you can participate in the work of holding each other's stories, not through social media performance, but through genuine relationship, through showing up, through paying attention, through caring. This is not abstract. This is practical. This is the work of being human in a world that has lost many of the structures that once made being human feel less lonely. You can reach out. You can connect. You can tell the people in your life that they matter, that you see them, that you remember them. You can create your own version of the parish register, whatever form that takes. A group of friends who share their lives with real honesty. A family that maintains its own records and stories. A community that gathers regularly to witness each other's joys and sorrows. The form does not matter as much as the intention. The intention to hold each other. The intention to create shared memory. The intention to say, we are here together. We witness each other. We belong. And now let yourself drift further from the specifics of history into something more elemental. The image of the book fades, but the feeling remains. The feeling of being held, of belonging, of being part of something that continues. You are part of something that continues. Your life is not an isolated event. It is connected to every life that has come before and every life that will come after. You carry your ancestors in your body, in your DNA, in the shape of your face and the color of your eyes, and you will carry forward into the future through the lives you touch, the people you love, the choices you make. This is not the same as being recorded in a register, but it is a kind of record nonetheless. A living record. A record written not in ink on parchment, but in the ongoing life of the human community. You are part of that life. You always have been. You always will be. And mortality, which seems like the ultimate isolation, it is actually a kind of belonging. Because everyone dies. Everyone has always died. Everyone will always die. Death is the one experience that is truly universal, truly shared, truly communal. When you die, you join everyone who has ever died. You become part of that vast company. You belong to that eternal pattern. The parish register understood this. It did not treat death as an ending or an erasure. It treated death as a transition, a movement from one column to another, from the register of the living to the register of the dead. Both were held in the same book. Both were part of the community. Both mattered. You can hold your own mortality this way, not with fear or denial or desperate attempts to avoid it, but with the simple acknowledgement that death is part of the pattern, part of the story, part of what it means to be human. You will die. This is not a failure or a tragedy. This is part of belonging to the human community. And when you die, you will not disappear. You will not be erased. You will become part of the memory of everyone who knew you. You will be held in the stories they tell, in the ways they were changed by knowing you, in the ongoing life that continues after you are gone. This is not immortality, but it is a kind of continuity, a kind of belonging that extends beyond your individual life. The parish register made this continuity visible and official. Your death would be recorded, and the record would remain, and future generations could find you there. But even without the register, the continuity exists. You are part of the chain. You are held by the pattern. Your life matters because you are here. And then being here connects you to everyone who has ever been here and everyone who will ever be here. This is enough. This has to be enough. Because this is what you have. Not a book that records you from birth to death, but the simple fact of your existence in the ongoing story of human life. You are here now. You are alive now. You are part of the pattern now. And that is enough. Let the loneliness soften. Let the restlessness ease. You do not need to solve the problem of belonging tonight. You do not need to recreate the parish register or find the perfect community or prove that you matter. You just need to rest in the understanding that you do matter, that you are held, that you are part of something larger. The book is a metaphor, but the holding is real. You are held by the earth that supports your body, by the air that fills your lungs, by the ongoing life that has produced you and will continue after you. You are held by the people who love you, even if they are far away, even if you cannot feel their holding right now. You are held by the fact of your own existence, which is not nothing, which is actually quite remarkable when you consider how unlikely it is that you are here at all. Your presence in this moment, in this particular arrangement of atoms and awareness, is the result of an unbroken chain of existence that stretches back billions of years. Every ancestor you have ever had survived long enough to reproduce. Every event that led to your parents' meeting happened exactly as it needed to happen. Every choice and chance and circumstance aligned to create this moment in which you exist. This is not destiny or fate or evidence of a plan. This is just the staggering improbability of being alive. And you are alive right now, in this moment. Your heart is beating. Your lungs are breathing. Your mind is thinking these thoughts. You are here, and being here is enough. The parish register would have said so. It would have written your name without asking what you had achieved or accomplished or proven. It would have recorded you simply because you exist, because you are part of the community, because you are here. You do not have the register, but you have the truth underneath it. You exist. You are part of the community of all living beings. You are here. And that is enough. Let that be enough. Let yourself rest in that simplicity. You do not have to be special. You do not have to stand out. You do not have to prove anything to anyone. You just have to be here. And you are. You are here. The book knows this. The earth knows this. The ongoing story knows this. And now, in this quiet moment, you can know it too. Rest now in the image of the church at twilight, the stone walls holding the memory of centuries, the register on its shelf, undisturbed, holding everyone who has ever belonged to this place, the pages yellowing but intact, the ink still dark, the names still legible. Your name would be there if you had been born in that time, in that place. But even without the register, you are held. You are held by the fact of your existence. You are held by the ongoing story. You are held by the simple truth that you are here, and being here has always been enough. Let the register fade from your mind. Let the church fade. Let the village fade. Let the past recede into the distance where it belongs. You are here now, in this time, in this place. And this time, this place can hold you too if you let it. Perhaps there is no book. Perhaps there is no single record that will hold you from birth to death. But there is the earth beneath you and the sky above you and the breath moving through you. There is the ongoing life that includes you, that has always included you, that will continue to include you even after you die. You are part of the pattern. You are held by the chain. You belong to the story, and the story continues. It continued before you arrived. It will continue after you depart. But right now, in this moment, you are part of it. You are here. You are alive. You are held. This is what the Parish Register knew. This is what it tried to preserve. In the simple acknowledgement that every life matters, that every person belongs, that being here is enough. You are enough. You have always been enough. The book would have said so. And even without the book, it is still true. Rest now. Let the longing soften into acceptance. Let the restlessness ease into stillness. You do not need to search for belonging anymore tonight. You can simply rest in the truth that you already belong. You always have. You always will. The register is a memory now, a symbol, a reminder of something that was lost, but also something that can never be completely lost because it points to a truth that is older than any book. The truth that human lives matter, that communities hold their members. That existence itself is a form of belonging. You exist. You belong. You are held. Let this be enough. Let this carry you into sleep. Let this quiet the restlessness and ease the loneliness and remind you that you are part of something larger, something ongoing, something that will remember you even when there is no book to record it. You are held. The story knows your name. You belong. Rest now. The book is closed for the night, but you remain. And that is everything.